The soft glow of the evening sun bathed the lush garden in gold as Aisha sat on the swing, lost in her thoughts. The scent of freshly cut grass filled the air, blending with the distant aroma of blooming jasmine. She had lived in this grand house all her life, surrounded by luxury. Yet tonight she felt more alone than ever. Her parents were away for a business trip, and the empty mansion felt suffocating. Her mind wandered, seeking escape, seeking something reckless, something that would break the monotony of her perfectly curated life. Then her gaze fell upon Zayan, the young gardener who had worked here for years. He was different from the other workers. There was something raw about him, something untamed. He was not wealthy, not educated like the men her parents wanted her to marry, but there was a certain charm in his rough hands and quiet strength. She had often caught herself staring at him from her window, watching the way his muscles tensed as he worked under the sun, the sweat dripping from his forehead. It was wrong, she knew that. A girl like her, rich, privileged, wasn't supposed to look at someone like him. But tonight, her thoughts had strayed too far. "Zayan," she called softly. He looked up, wiping his hands on his old, faded shirt. "Yes, ma'am." She hated when he called her that. It made her feel distant, like she was just another spoiled girl looking down at him. "Come here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated before stepping closer. She could see the confusion in his eyes, but there was something else too, something unreadable. "Sit with me," she said, moving aside on the swing. "That's not appropriate, ma'am," he murmured, glancing around nervously. "No one's here," she said, her heart pounding. She didn't know what she was doing, but she didn't want to stop. He hesitated before finally sitting beside her, his body tense. "Do you have a girlfriend?" she asked suddenly. Zayan stiffened. The question caught him off guard. "Why are you asking me this?" "Just curious," she said, trying to sound casual. He exhaled, staring ahead. "I did, once, but she's gone now." Something in the way he said it made her chest tighten. "You still love her?" He didn't answer right away. Then, after a long pause, he simply said, "Some loves never fade." A strange jealousy rose in her chest. She didn't even know why. It wasn't like she loved him, she barely knew him. Yet, the thought of him loving another girl made her uneasy. She shifted closer, their shoulders almost touching. "What if you had a chance to forget her?" He turned to her, eyes dark with confusion. "What do you mean?" Aisha swallowed hard. She didn't want to explain. She just wanted to feel something real, something reckless, even if just for a night. Slowly, hesitantly, she leaned in. Zayan froze as her lips hovered near his. "Aisha, this is—" "Just shut up," she whispered, closing the gap between them. Their lips met, and for a moment, the world faded. The fireflies danced in the distance. The wind whispered through the trees, and all that remained was the forbidden touch of two souls who were never meant to cross paths. But even in that heated moment, when their bodies began to betray logic, Zayan's lips parted, and a name escaped them. Not her name. "Hania." The world shattered. Aisha pulled away as if burned, her breath caught in her throat. It took her a moment to realize what had just happened, and when she did, a sick feeling settled in her stomach. She had given herself to him, and all the while, he was thinking of someone else. Tears stung her eyes, but she forced them back. She couldn't let him see her break. She stood up, adjusting her dress, trying to act as if she didn't care. "I have to go," she whispered, her voice hollow. Zayan reached for her hand. "Aisha, wait!" But she yanked it away. Her heart was screaming. She had done something irreversible, and now she would have to live with it. Aisha stormed into her room, locking the door behind her. Her heart was racing, her breaths uneven. She pressed her hands against her chest as if trying to calm the storm raging inside her. "Hania!" That name echoed in her mind like a curse. She clenched her fists, biting her lower lip so hard it almost bled. How could she have been so stupid? How could she let herself fall into this moment, only to realize she was never even in his heart? She stared at herself in the mirror. Her face was flushed, her hair slightly disheveled. She didn't look like herself anymore. She wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, anger bubbled inside her, anger at herself, anger at him. How dare he? She had given him a part of herself, something she could never take back. And all along, he was thinking about another woman. Her. Mind went back to the moment she had asked him about love. Some loves never fade. Now she understood. He wasn't over that girl. Whoever Hania was, she still owned his heart. Aisha had just been a momentary escape. The thought made her feel sick. She grabbed her phone, almost dialing her best friend Meher, but then stopped. What would she? Did I even say, "Hey, I just gave myself to my gardener, and guess what? He moaned another woman's name." No, she couldn't tell anyone. No one could ever know. She threw the phone on the bed and hugged herself, feeling dirty, used. For the first time in her life, she regretted something so deeply it physically hurt. The next morning, she avoided Zayan. She didn't go to the garden like she usually did. She stayed in her room, pretending to be asleep when the maids knocked for breakfast. She didn't want to see him, didn't want to hear his voice. But by noon, the silence of her room became suffocating. She couldn't stay locked up forever. Gathering herself, she stepped outside, walking down the marble staircase into the grand hall. As she reached the backyard, she caught sight of Zayan near the rose bushes, shirtless under the sun, watering the plants like nothing had happened. Her stomach twisted. How could he be so normal? Her blood boiled. She walked toward him, her heels clicking against the stone path. Zayan looked up, his expression unreadable. "Madam," he said, voice careful. Her jaw tightened. Madam, not Aisha. Not the name he had moaned last night, but the one that created distance between them. "Good. You didn't say anything," she said coldly. "Last night," he exhaled. I don't have to explain," she cut him off. "I was just a mistake, wasn't I?" He looked away. "I didn't mean—" "But you did," she snapped. "You meant every bit of it. The way you touched me, the way you kissed me, and then you ruined it all." Silence stretched between them. She crossed her arms, trying to appear indifferent. "Who is she?" Zayan stiffened. She gave a bitter laugh. "Hanaya, the girl you were really with last night, the one you wanted while you were inside me." His jaw clenched. "Say something," she demanded, her voice trembling. His eyes darkened. "It's none of your concern." Aisha recoiled. "None of my concern?" He stepped closer, his gaze unreadable. "You were never supposed to care, Aisha. It was just a moment, a mistake. I should have never let it happen." Something inside her shattered at his words. Her throat tightened. "You think it was just a mistake?" He didn't answer. She let out a small, bitter laugh, stepping back. "I hate you." For a second, something flashed in his eyes. Pain? Guilt? She didn't know, and she didn't care anymore. She turned on her heel and walked away, her heart pounding. She had made the biggest mistake of her life. And Zayan? He would never love her. Aisha spent the rest of the day trying to act normal, but no matter what she did, her mind kept replaying the way Zayan had looked at her, the way he had said it was a mistake. That word burned in her chest. A mistake. Was that all she was to him? She sat in the living room, scrolling mindlessly, through her phone, pretending to be interested in anything but her own thoughts. But her fingers trembled, and she had bitten her lip so much that it was swollen. "Aisha, are you okay?" She looked up. Meher was staring at her through a video call, concern in her voice. Aisha forced a smile. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" Meher raised an eyebrow. "Because you look like you just murdered someone and are now wondering where to hide the body." A hollow laugh escaped Aisha's lips. "If only." Meher's playful expression softened. "Come on. Tell me what's wrong." Aisha hesitated. For a split second, she thought about telling her everything. But then she imagined the judgment, the shock, the endless questions. So she swallowed the lump in her throat and lied. "It's nothing. Just stressed about life." Meher gave her a knowing look but didn't push. "Then let's go out tonight. A party, dinner, drinks, whatever you want. You need a distraction." Aisha almost said no. But then an idea formed in her mind. Maybe she did need a distraction. Maybe she needed to do something reckless again. But this time, with someone who actually wanted her. "Fine," she said, forcing a smirk. "Let's go crazy tonight." That evening, Aisha stepped out of her house wearing a sleek black dress, one that hugged her body perfectly. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she made her way outside. She didn't look toward the garden. She didn't want to, but she felt him before she saw him. Zayan was standing near the entrance, wiping sweat from his forehead, his shirt half unbuttoned. His eyes flickered toward her, and for a moment, something flashed in them. Regret, desire, jealousy? She didn't care. She walked past him without a word, letting the scent of her expensive perfume linger in the air between them. Let him see her like this. Let him see what he had lost. Meher pulled up in her car, lowering her sunglasses. "Damn, girl, you look hot." Aisha slid into the car, flashing a fake smile. "That's the plan." As they drove away, she didn't turn back. But she wished she had, because if she had, she would have seen the way Zayan was watching her, his jaw tight, his fists clenched, his face unreadable. The club was alive with music, flashing lights and the scent of expensive liquor. Aisha downed her second drink, feeling the burn in her throat, but welcoming the numbness that followed. She laughed at something Meher said, her body swaying to the rhythm of the music. That's when she felt a hand on her waist. She turned to see Adil, tall, rich, confident, the kind of guy she was supposed to end up with. "You look dangerous tonight," he murmured in her ear. She smirked. "Maybe I am." His fingers traced the bare skin of her arm. "Let's find out." This is what she wanted, wasn't it? A distraction, a replacement. So why did her stomach twist with unease? She let him pull her onto the dance floor, his hands roaming her body, his lips dangerously close to hers. And then she closed her eyes. For a second, she imagined Zayan's hands instead, his touch, his lips. And just like that, she felt sick. What the hell was she doing? She pulled away, her heart hammering. "I need air." Ignoring Adil's confused look, she pushed through the crowd and stumbled outside. The night air was cold, but it did nothing to cool the fire in her chest. She leaned against the wall, her breath shaky. No matter what she did, she couldn't escape him. Zayan was everywhere, in her thoughts, in her body, in her regrets. And worst of all, she still wanted him, even when she knew he didn't want her back. Aisha sat in the back seat of Meher's car, staring out at the empty roads. As the city lights blurred past, the cold air from the window did little to cool the heat rising inside her. "What the hell was that?" Meher asked, glancing at her. "You just ran out of there like you saw a ghost." Aisha exhaled, rubbing her temples. "I don't know, I just couldn't do it." Meher sighed. "Aisha, I don't know what's going on with you, but you need to snap out of it. You were the one who wanted a distraction, remember?" She did. But the moment Adil had touched her, she had realized no one else could replace the one person she hated wanting. Zayan. The name itself made her fists clench. "I just want to go home," Aisha muttered. Meher groaned. "Fine, but you owe me an explanation later." The rest of the ride was silent. When Aisha got home, it was past midnight. The house was quiet, the staff already asleep. She slipped off her heels and tiptoed toward the stairs. But then a voice stopped her. "You think dressing up and letting some rich boy touch you will change what happened?" She froze. Slowly, she turned around. Zayan was standing near the shadows of the garden, his eyes dark, his arms crossed. He looked different tonight, not like the quiet gardener she had always known. There was something possessive in the way he stared at her. Aisha swallowed hard, masking the storm inside her with anger. "Excuse me?" He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I saw you, Aisha." Her heartbeat quickened. "And?" His jaw clenched. "And it pissed me off." A laugh escaped her lips, but it was hollow. "Oh, why do you care? I thought I was just a mistake to you." Zayan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't mean it like that." "Then how did you mean it?" she snapped. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you got what you wanted." "You used me," moaned another woman's name, and then acted like it was nothing. Pain flickered in his eyes, but she didn't care. He deserved to hurt. He stepped even closer, until there was barely any space between them. She could feel the heat of his body, the way his breath was uneven, just like hers. "I didn't use you," he said, voice low. "That night, it wasn't supposed to happen. But it did. And I can't stop thinking about it." Her heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let herself believe him. Liar. Zayan's gaze darkened. "You think I don't regret it? You think I don't hate myself for wanting you?" Aisha's breath hitched. He wasn't supposed to say that. "Then why?" she whispered. "Why did you say her name?" Silence. For the first time, Zayan looked away. That was all the answer she needed. A sharp pain shot through her chest. She let out a bitter chuckle. "That's what I thought." She turned to leave, but his hand grabbed her wrist. Her body tensed. "Aisha, stop," he murmured. She closed her eyes, trying to fight the emotions clawing at her throat. "Let me go." He hesitated, but then he did. She walked away, her heart pounding so hard it hurt, but she didn't look back, because if she did, she might not be able to walk away at all. Aisha didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every word, every look, every touch. Zayan had admitted it. He wanted her. But it didn't change the truth. He didn't love her. He still belonged to someone else. By morning, she made a decision. She needed to erase him from her life. She got up, showered, and dressed in the simplest clothes she could find, something dull, something that didn't make her feel like the girl who had once craved his touch. As she walked downstairs, she heard voices from the garden. Her heart recognized his before her mind even processed it. Zayan. She stepped out, her breath catching in her throat when she saw him talking to another worker. He looked different today, his usual calm, composed self, as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't fallen apart while he had stayed whole. That made something inside her snap. She walked straight toward him. "Zayan." His body tensed before he turned. His eyes met hers, but there was a guarded look in them. "Aisha," he said quietly, "can we talk?" He glanced at the other worker, then back at her. "Now?" "Yes. Now." He nodded and followed her inside the house into the empty dining hall. Aisha crossed her arms. "I'm leaving for London next week." Zayan blinked, caught off guard. "What?" She forced a small shrug. "I think it's time for me to move on. My parents have been asking me to study there, and I think they're right. I need a change." Silence. He stared at her, his jaw tight. "So that's it? You're running away?" She exhaled, keeping her voice steady. "No, I'm moving forward." A bitter laugh escaped his lips. "By pretending none of this happened?" "Yes." Zayan took a step closer, his voice dangerously soft. "And if I don't want to forget?" Aisha's heart skipped. He wasn't supposed to say that. She forced herself to smile. "That's not my problem." Zayan exhaled, looking away. "Aisha." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "I just wanted to tell you because I don't want any unfinished business between us." He gave a humorless chuckle. "Unfinished business? You think we can just tie this up neatly and move on?" "Yes," she lied. As Zayan shook his head, his fingers curling into fists. "You really don't get it, do you?" She frowned. "Get what?" He took another step forward. "Too close. Too much." "I wanted you that night, Aisha, and I still do." Her stomach twisted. "Then, why?" "Because I was scared," he admitted, his voice raw. "Because I knew the moment I touched you, I wouldn't be able to stop." Aisha felt lightheaded. This wasn't how this conversation was supposed to go. "I thought if I reminded myself of Hanaya, I could keep myself from falling for you," he whispered. "But it didn't work. Nothing works." Her breath hitched. She shook her head. "Stop." He stepped even closer, his voice dangerously low. "Tell me you don't want me and I'll stop." Aisha opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because she did want him, but she also knew the truth. Wanting wasn't enough. Love was supposed to be whole, undeniable, certain, not something you had to fight against. Not something you had to convince yourself of. She took a step back, forcing herself to breathe. You'll never love me the way you loved her. Silence. She gave a small, sad smile. And I deserve more than that. Zayan's face hardened. So that's it? Aisha nodded, even as her heart screamed. That's it. She turned and walked, away, each step heavier than the last, and this time, he didn't stop her. The days passed in a blur. Aisha threw herself into preparations for her move, keeping herself busy with packing, booking flights, and making plans. She did everything. Except feel, but no matter how hard she tried, Zayan's words haunted her. Tell me you don't want me and I'll stop. I thought if I reminded myself of Hania, I could keep myself from falling for you. But it didn't work. She had walked away that day, and he hadn't followed. Maybe that should have made things easier, but instead it made everything worse. She wanted him to fight for her, to stop her, but he didn't, because in the end she wasn't enough to make him forget her. No matter how much he wanted her, he had never truly been hers, and she couldn't live with that. The night before she was supposed to leave, Aisha stood by her bedroom window, looking down at the garden. It was empty. Zayan was gone. A part of her had hoped to see him there, working, waiting, anything. But he wasn't there. Her phone buzzed. Meher, all set for tomorrow? Aisha hesitated before replying. Me. Yeah. It was a lie. She wasn't ready. But what choice did she have? She sighed, turning away from the window, only to freeze when she heard a sound from outside. A deep voice, low and familiar, his voice. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she ran to the balcony, peering down. And there he was. Zayan stood in the middle of the garden, his hands in his pockets, looking straight up at her. Aisha's breath caught. He had never come to her like this before. She swallowed hard before forcing herself to speak. What are you doing here? He didn't answer. Instead, he asked, You're really leaving? A lump formed in her throat. You already knew that. Zayan nodded slowly, then looked away. I thought I could let you go. Silence stretched between them. Then he exhaled sharply. But I can't. Aisha's fingers curled around the railing. No, he couldn't do this now. Not when she had finally convinced herself to leave. Zayan, don't go, he said quietly. She flinched. It was the first time he had asked her for anything. But it wasn't enough. You don't get to do this, she whispered. You don't get to want me only when I'm about to leave. I wanted you long before that, he admitted. I was just too much of a coward to say it. Her chest ached. And what about her? Zayan was silent. Aisha forced out a bitter laugh. That's what I thought. She turned to walk inside, but then his voice stopped her. Hania is dead. She froze. Slowly, she turned back. What? Zayan exhaled shakily, running a hand over his face. For the first time, he looked vulnerable. She died 2 years ago in an accident. I tried to save her, but... His voice broke. Aisha's heart clenched. Oh, God. He looked up at her, and there was something raw in his eyes. I spent every day blaming myself. I thought if I kept her memory alive, I could keep my guilt from killing me. Aisha swallowed hard, her emotions crashing down on her. Zayan... He took a deep breath. And then you happened. Her breath hitched. You came into my life like a storm, and suddenly nothing made sense anymore. I wanted you. I hated that I wanted you. His voice dropped. But I never stopped. Aisha felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her. You once asked me if I still loved her, he murmured. She held her breath. And the truth is, I don't know. Pain stabbed through her chest. But I know that when I kissed you, I didn't think of her. I only thought of you. Aisha's vision blurred. She had spent so long believing she would always be second place in his heart. But what if she wasn't? What if she was the only thing keeping him alive? Zayan took a step closer. Tell me to leave, and I will. But if you still want me, even a little, he exhaled, then don't go. Aisha's heart pounded. This was it. the moment she had been waiting for. But was it too late? She took a shaky breath, staring into his eyes. "And then," she whispered, "I don't know if I can trust you." Zayan's expression flickered with pain. "But I want to," she admitted. He held out his hand. "Then let me prove it to you." Aisha stared at it, and for the first time in forever, she didn't walk away. She reached for him, and this time he was the one who didn't let go. Aisha didn't sleep that night. She sat on her bed staring at her suitcase, the weight of her decision pressing on her chest. She had been so sure she was leaving. But now Zayan's words wouldn't leave her mind. Let me prove it to you. Could she really stay? Could she trust him? A part of her was still afraid. What if she was making a mistake? What if he never truly got over Hania? What if she was just another wound he was trying to heal with temporary affection? She sighed, rubbing her temples. She needed answers. And there was only one way to get them. The next morning she went looking for him. She found him in the garden, as always, watering the plants. But this time he didn't look like the distant, unreadable Zayan she had known before. This time he was waiting for her. She walked toward him, her heart pounding. "Zayan." He turned, his gaze soft but uncertain. "You're still here." Aisha swallowed. "I have questions." He nodded. "Ask me anything." She took a deep breath. "If Hania was still alive, would you have ever looked at me?" Zayan was quiet for a moment, his jaw tightening. Then he looked her in the eyes. "No." Her stomach twisted. She had expected that answer, but hearing it still hurt. "But that doesn't mean what I feel for you is any less real," he continued. Aisha shook her head. "It matters, Zayan, it matters because I will always wonder if I was just second choice." "You were never a choice," he murmured. "You were something I never expected, something I never saw coming. You crashed into my life when I wasn't ready. And yes, if she were alive, I wouldn't have let myself love you, but she's gone, and I am still here." He stepped closer, his voice low, raw. "And when I look at you now, Aisha, I don't see what's missing in my past. I see what's standing in front of me, and for the first time in 2 years, I don't want to keep living in the past." Aisha's breath caught. "That night I messed up," he admitted. "I didn't know how to let go of my grief. I thought saying her name would remind me of who I was before you. But the truth?" He exhaled shakily. "The moment you walked away, I realized I had already changed. And I didn't want to fight it anymore." Aisha clenched her fists. "Then why didn't you stop me?" "Because I was afraid you deserved better." Her chest tightened. "And now?" Zayan's lips twitched. "Now I don't care what you deserve. I just know I don't want to lose you." A lump formed in her throat. Was this enough? Would it ever be enough? She didn't know. But for the first time in weeks, her heart wasn't telling her to run. She let out a shaky breath. "I need time." Zayan nodded. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait." She hesitated, then reached for his hand. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was holding on to something broken. She was holding on to something that was healing, something that just might be real. Days turned into weeks. Aisha didn't leave for London. At first she told herself it was temporary, that she was just giving herself time to think. But deep down she knew the truth. She had already made her choice the night she reached for Zayan's hand, but choosing to stay didn't mean everything was perfect. There were still nights when doubt crept in, whispering in her ear, reminding her of her fears. There were still moments when she caught Zayan lost in thought, his eyes distant, and she wondered if he was thinking about her, Hania. And yet, something was different now. Zayan wasn't the same man he had been before. He no longer looked away when she questioned him. He no longer avoided her touch. He no longer ran from the truth, and neither did she. One evening, Aisha found herself sitting by the garden, watching Zayan as he worked. It had become a habit, just watching him. But this time he noticed. "You always stare at me," he murmured, setting his tools down. Aisha smirked. "Maybe I just like the view." Zayan chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Or maybe you still don't trust me." She hesitated. He wasn't wrong. He sat beside her, his knee brushing against hers. "Ask me." She frowned. "Ask you what?" "Whatever it is you're afraid to know." A lump formed in her throat. She had spent weeks avoiding this conversation, afraid of what the answer might be, but now she needed to hear it. "Do you still love her?" she whispered. Zayan exhaled slowly. "I will always care about her." Aisha swallowed hard. "But love?" He turned to her, his gaze steady. "Love is what I feel when I look at you." Her chest tightened. "I thought love was something that only happened once in a lifetime," he admitted. "That after her I'd never feel it again, but you proved me wrong." Aisha's breath hitched. "With you, I don't feel like I'm filling a void anymore," he murmured. "I just feel whole." Tears burned at the back of her eyes. "Do you believe me?" he asked softly. Aisha didn't answer with words. Instead, she leaned in and kissed him. This time, there was no doubt, no hesitation, no ghost of another woman between them. There was only him, only her, only them. And as his arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer, Aisha knew. This wasn't a mistake. This was exactly where she was meant to be.